Okay, guys, here we go. We are on Act 3, Scene 3, and we are in Friar Lawrence's cell. When it says cell, that's just where he lives. Okay. Friar Lawrence comes in, and Romeo comes in. And of course, the friar's heard. He says, Romeo, what news? What's the prince's doom? What sorrow craves acquaintance in my hand that I yet know not? Dramatic irony here again. We know that Romeo has been banished. He does not know yet, right? Too familiar is my dear son with such sour company. I bring thee tidings of the prince's doom. And he tells him, right, a better judgment vanished from my lips, not body's death, like you're not going to be executed. You should feel lucky, but body's banishment. Be merciful. And Romeo says, banishment, be merciful and say death. So he goes on, he's going to go on and on about this for a while. And he has a very similar reaction to Juliet in that sounds even worse, right? Hence, from Verona thou art banished. Be patient, for the world is broad and wide. And then Romeo goes nuts, right? There is no world without Verona walls, but purgatory, torture, hell itself. And he goes on and on. Now the friar gets a little frustrated with him. He says, "Oh, deadly sin, rude unthankfulness, right? The law, thy fault, our law calls out death, but the kind prince taking thy part hath brushed aside the law and turned that black word death to banishment. This is dear mercy, even if thou seest not." So he's trying to get him to see that he should feel lucky for this, right? Maybe the friar can solve this somehow, right? But Romeo is going to cry on and on about this for quite a while. And I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here. I'm not going to get into every single line. Um, yeah, Romeo is he's speaking of himself in third person all through here, right? And how horrible it is what's happened to him. Very, very dramatic. But banished to kill me, banished. The damned use that word in hell, blah, 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 goes on and on and on. Okay, Friar says, "Thou fond madman, hear me a little." And Romeo says, "Not if you're going to talk about banishment," right? But he keeps going on. This is a really, really like he's just crying and going nuts if you're directing this part of the play. Unless philosophy can make a Juliet, displant the town, reverse the prince's doom, it helps us not, it prevails not, talk no more. Friar says, "Oh, I see that madmen have no ears." And Romeo says, "When wise men have no eyes." He's just arguing and arguing and arguing. Um, Finally, we get a knocking within, right? And the friar tells him to hide himself, right? Because he's supposed to be getting out of town, right? But he says he's not going to hide. And finally, they figure out who is there, and it is the nurse, right? Hopefully, bring tidings from Juliet. Okay. "Where's my lady's word? Where's Romeo?" And he says, "There on the ground with his own tears made drunk," right? He's just crying and crying and crying. Okay. And she says, of course, that Juliet's doing the same thing, right? Okay, weeping and blubbering, blubbering and weeping. Romeo says, "Nurse." And the nurse says, "Well, death's the end of all. This isn't the end of everything," right? Romeo asks how Juliet is, right? And of course, she's crying too. She says, "Nothing, sir." Starts up, Tybalt calls, and then Romeo cries. We already know all this, right? But Romeo is, of course, now he gets really dramatic here and he says, "Tell me, friar, in what vile part of this anatomy, my body, does my name lodge? In other words, what part of me defines me as Montague?" Telling me that I may sack the hateful mansion. He wants to destroy the house of his own body, or at least destroy the part of him that's Montague because it's causing all this trouble. Right now, this isn't realistic, right? But he's grabbing a knife. He's threatening to kill himself. Right. The friar's going to go on and on and really lecture him here. He's had it, right? Art thou a man? Thy form cries thou art. Thy tears are womanish. Kind of sexist comments here, guys. Sometimes, sorry, it was a long time ago. Um, but he's trying to get him to see all the things that he should feel lucky for, right? Which he does have a point with, right? I'm going to kind of skip forward through a lot of this here. Okay, rouse thee, man. Thy Juliet is alive. For those dear sake, fast forward, skipping forward here. There thou art happy. Tybalt would kill thee, but thou slewest Tybalt. There you should be happy there too, right? The law threatens death, becomes thy friend, turns it to exile. There you should be happy, right? But you're acting like a brat, basically, he's saying. Okay, so what he's saying is, um, ascend to Juliet's chamber. Here's the plan. Hence and comfort her. Look, thou stay not till the watch be set, for then thou canst not pass to Mantua. Mantua is a small town outside of Verona, where thou shalt live till we can find a time to blaze your marriage, reconcile your friends, beg pardon of the prince, and call you back with 1,000 times more joy than thou went forth in lamentation. So he's telling Romeo, go spend the night with Juliet tonight as he planned. First thing in the morning, take off, get out of here, right? And in the meantime, I'll figure out a plan to let you get back. Remember, the friar's plan all this time was that the marriage of Romeo and Juliet could somehow solve the feud between the families, right? So we'll see if the friar can actually pull this off now. Maybe everything will turn out just okay. Um, Tells the nurse to tell Juliet that Romeo is coming, going to spend the night still. The nurse says, oh, she could stay here all night listening to the friar, right? Because he's so smart. Oh, what learning is. Okay, so the nurse leaves. Romeo says, how well my comfort is revived by this. And he says, sojourn in Mantova. I'll find out your man. He shall signify from time to time. He's going to send a messenger to him when it's okay to come back, when he's figured this out, right? So can the friar pull this off? It were a grief. It were a grief so brief to part with it. He hates to leave, but he's going to. So we'll see how this works out. Okay, that is the end of scene 3.